Testing, mic one, testing, mic one, testing, mic one, mic two, mic three, testing. Mic one, table, mic one, mic two, mic two, mic two, mic one. Mic two, mic one. Handheld, mic one, handheld. Walking around the room. Okay.
Picking on them, when I travel and I go to like a conference, and I'll say I'm from Cleveland, they assume the Cleveland Restoration Society did them. They didn't. They had, I mean, they have a different role, but they had nothing to do with any of these projects.
Right.
Zero. And Historic Gateway Neighborhood has raised like on the arcade, we raised 22 million, and we're a nonprofit.
Well, whatever you,
No, I like to amplify people so they know
Whatever you
know
need to say,
who
you
it is,
say.
you know? Well, I mean, it's factual. My favorite political line is Daniel Moynihan, who I used to have that ball. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts.
well, I try, and because it does go to posterity once it's taped or once it's,
Yeah, no, that's fine. Like I said, I'm a big stickler for what's accurate. And if I don't, I'll say, clearly say
Right.
we don't know, or sometimes like anecdotally we're told we can't prove it. We have a couple anecdotal stories about John D. Rockefeller that we tell, but we say they're anecdotal. We just can't prove it.
you, when I was doing the interviewing and the research for the University Circle Creating a Sense of Place film, it's been on VIZ now 9 times.
That's a film I need to get.
And that's.
Is it on DVD?
It can be downloaded from WVIZ.
Okay.
There's,
Okay.
just do it.
Okay.
There've been.
I'll tell my daughter. Maybe she's got to be aware of it. Then I just haven't talked about it
Right.
with her.
You can also buy a copy off the.
Western Reserve Historical Society has it?
No. UniversityCircleFilm.com.
No. Okay.
Yeah, I got
Should write that
interviews
down.
with Peter Lewis and Bob Grease and Ellen Mavick in addition to the
Do
film.
you like the Peter B. Lewis building?
Do I? Yes.
Okay. Just asking. I wasn't making a judgment.
If you look
I
at.
think I like the building. I wish it was in a spot where it could be seen more. It's in a spot where it could be seen more. It's kind of hidden.
Well, don't we wish that our friend and Jim's really colleague, Jim Polchek's building were a better building?
Which one?
It's the Mandel, the Mandel social,
Science?
yeah. The one with the stairs,
Across the street from,
the other corner.
Oh, okay. That's pretty nondescript, yeah. I was thinking more of the new student union building, which is very interesting to me. I like that building. My son was the project manager building a dorm there last summer. They built a dorm, and it was not great architecture, but that's what they wanted. It was like he was the construction, he was in charge. He was in charge, actually. Amazing to me, 27 years old.
So we're going to start because it's 2:00 and
Should I turn this on? It's
we
Oh, good. You did it
think
from
we
remote.
need to do that. And I just want to say again, are there any people here for the first time? Okay, this is part of the Soul of Cleveland series, which is about Cleveland as we feel it, not as you and I have accomplished things. So if that means, if that's free, we brought people around a table for 6 months to discuss what those things were that made a difference in their lives. And that's how the Soul of Cleveland project got started. And these subjects come out of those meetings and bibliography, and there are on the back table questionnaires that we've gotten 6 dozen answers to. And we keep going, and there will be others in the future, other series. But Moreland Courts is iconic in this city and I would say worldwide. And we had a session on high-rise buildings of note, either social note or aesthetic. And the first one was on bookstores, the history of bookstores. And I just want you to know, everybody, we found Publix images at CSU. They were lost, not by me, but by them. And they were just sent this week, so next week I'll put those up. But there were bookstores that were meaningful to all of us, as bookstores can be. All right, today is about a favorite subject, arcades, because Cleveland has not just one arcade, but several. And arcades, there's a book that is 1,000 pages by Walter Benjamin called Arcades. And it was the Arcades of Paris, and he never finished the book. But it's essay after essay on what goes on in arcades. Our arcade is something dear to us up here. We've lived it, we've toured it, we've experienced it for years by having offices there and going to visit people who had businesses there. So, as in all of these sessions, there's only 2 or 3 people that know a lot about a subject. I mean, others know pieces of it, but Tom Yablonsky, who I have up here with me, and who is on the radio this week talking about arcades, has been giving tours of the arcades downtown. But I'm going to tell you what he does. For 36 years, he has been a manager, a city planner, community developer, economic developer in financial matters. He founded or helped initiate 3 historic preservation development programs, including the Warehouse District and Gateway District in downtown Cleveland. The third as co-founder of Canalway Partners, very important, which is the collaborative partner in a regional effort now known as the Ohio and Erie Canalway, which runs 110 miles north to downtown Cleveland from
Tuscarawas
County. Since 2001, he's jointly held the position of Executive Director for the Historic Warehouse District Development Corp., Historic Gateway Neighborhood Corporation, and since August of 2006, he's also served as the Vice President of the Greater Cleveland Growth Association. Statewide, he's been a board member of Heritage Ohio, and his graduate degree was from Indiana University at Bloomington, and his BA was from CSU. Now, so I don't argue with someone like that. And so I present him to you because he is absolutely the expert on arcades. I live there, so I will pipe in, and he has his role this day.
Okay. Thank you, Nina. We'll sequence this a little bit. Just small correction, because it mattered to, I was director of downtown development from 1990 to 95 for the Growth Association, and through that initiative, I actually had a fund that we studied the arcade 3 times, hoping to get it restored. Some of those studies were used later. I left there to become the executive director of Historic Gateway Neighborhood in 95, and I will talk a lot about Historic Gateway Neighborhood because in my view, they are kind of the unsung hero of restoration and renovation in Cleveland. In fact, I've calculated they've done more historic redevelopment than any other community development corporation in the country, much less Cleveland. So, get started. The arcade itself, I think it's Cleveland's most significant historic building. It was the ninth building in the country put on the National Register of Historic Places. For the country's bicentennial in 1976, the Washington Post did kind of an informal view of what were the 10 greatest buildings in America. Their architectural critic, Wolf von Eckhart, considered the arcade one of the 10 greatest buildings in America. So it's been on a couple of top 10 lists. As Nina has said, it's really grown out of a movement, the arcade movement. It's not the oldest one in the country. The oldest one's in Providence, Rhode Island, but it is probably the grandest. And the reason it exists, really, is that Cleveland, after the Civil War, and because we were untouched by the war physically, like some other cities further south, Cleveland really was one of the economic engines of the North, and our industrial development grew, and the civic leaders of the city after the Civil War, from post-1865 to 1890, some of them traveled Europe and thought, we need to bring back things here that are representative of the grandeur of what we think is becoming a great city. So, supposedly modeled after the Vittorio Emanuele in Italy, which is a very grand civic space, the arcade is modeled after that. It was designed by Smith and Eisenman and built in 1890. At the time, you're only at 4th and Euclid here. Most people don't realize Millionaires Row on Euclid really went from what was called Bond Street, which is today East 6th, to East 40th Street, which back then was Case Street. So very nearby to building such commercial grandeur was really the greatest residential area of downtown. In fact, and I want to just highlight 2 things. 2 of those industrialists are more memorialized on the Euclid Avenue entrance. Stephen Harkness, who helped co-found Standard Oil with John D. Rockefeller, and Charles Brush, who's famous for a whole host of reasons. They are memorialized on the Euclid Avenue entrance on those medallions. So I just wanted to note that to you. The arcade itself, when it was built in 1890, it connected 2 streets that existed at different geologic levels of the original lake shore of Cleveland. So Superior Avenue is 1 full lake level lower than Euclid as you move south. The reason I tell you that story was the building was considered so daring and controversial to build, nobody would bid on building it. No construction company thought that design could be built. So no Cleveland company, at least. It was built by the Detroit Bridge Company. So somebody from Detroit bid and built a building in Cleveland. And fortunately, we have it really almost intact today after a full restoration as to what people experienced in 1890. There were a couple of small features added. There was a bridge added in the 20s, so people didn't have to walk all the way around to get to the places they wanted to go inside. And also, you saw back on the other slide, and I don't think we have it on slide, but the Superior Avenue has a grand arch entryway. That same grand arch entryway used to exist on Euclid. But believe it or not, Euclid Avenue was considered so booming and such an important retail street that they actually eliminated the arch and filled it in 1939 so they could have more retail space to rent, and that's the way Euclid Avenue looks today. So at one time it was just as grand, in my view, architecturally on both sides. The other thing that's really important to note, and that's why I bring up Historic Gateway, the Growth Association helped fund these studies in the 90s, but really they were just funding. They didn't have tools to figure out how to finance the restoration of the arcade. Historic Gateway Neighborhood, which is a historic preservation-based CDC, created with the Warehouse District a program known as a Conservation Easement Program, which is a tax incentive, a little more arcane or obscure than the actual tax credit inside the IRS tax code. But that easement program fulfilled a dramatic purpose in restoring the arcade. For those of you who remember the arcade, it had a last brief, really boom period while Tower City was under construction in the late 80s and into the 90s, where all the retail spaces were filled on 2 levels of the ground floor. But it still had, at my count at one time, over 42 buckets catching water from the ceiling when it rained. So obviously it wasn't, as Nino knows, it needed great TLC and care. So one of the most dramatic things about the arcade is that skylight. And the skylight, restoring the skylight really doesn't get you any extra rent, but you got to do it. So it was serendipitous, but our easement program raised $12 million off that tax incentive towards the restoration project, which was a $65 million project from October of 99 to May of 2001, when it reopened as a Hyatt Regency Hotel and 2 levels of retail. The cost of the skylight, serendipitously, was exactly almost the same as what the easement raised. It was $12 million. So that was, and then underneath that skylight today, not dripping, not leaking. Today, the building has really not yet achieved back the level of life and vitality programming that it really needs to have those 2 ground floors. And part of that's just the tension between a hotel, which wants things to be simple and easy and quiet, and the retail. And so we're trying to figure that out. The current hotel operators are trying to work with a new owner group out of Toronto who happen to own the Prince Edward or King Edward in Toronto, I'm not sure what the name, which is a very similar historic, iconic building in Toronto. So hopefully we come to a good long-term solution. But it's a glorious building today. One thing I would tell Clevelanders they don't have to worry about. What that easement did was the arcade structurally and legally is in its greatest position ever. Part of this legal structure on doing an easement, in perpetuity, it's mandated the building be maintained. We assess it annually because of that easement. There's a maintenance program annually because of the easement. So I would just say to citizens, it's your civic resource. The easement declares it's a community civic benefit, not a private property to be where anybody can do anything they want. So it's part of a legal contract. And just more views of it and just its grandeur. Today, when you start at that 3rd level and go up, those are Hyatt Regency rooms. And when you're in the 2 10-story buildings, which in 1890 was a skyscraper, a 10-story building, because they did not yet build steel skyscrapers. They were coming very soon. There's one adjacent to it, 1895, a steel skyscraper down Euclid Avenue. But a 10-story load-bearing building was really of the 1890 era, was a skyscraper. And we have a great 1890 building on Public Square with Burnham Society for Saving, same vintage, same era. So today, we celebrate that starting from May to September. Historic Gateway Neighborhood, the sponsoring organization of a program called Take a Hike, where we have 5 historic hikes every week, 5 different tours, sponsored by 5 different organizations, actually, even though Gateway coordinates it. The one the arcade is the anchor for is the Gateway District Tour. So it starts there. And so I would encourage you when May 15th rolls around to look that up on Gateway District website and certainly take that tour if you never have. One of the things we do on those tours, we have 11 different Actors Equity actor and actresses play historic Cleveland figures who intercept your tour and give you their story of how they interact with these buildings. So this was Frances Payne Bolton. We're retiring her character this year. So if you go on it, you'll not get, she retired, so we retired her character. We are bringing a couple new characters. We're moving John D. Rockefeller over to the Kelowna and Euclid arcades, where he's part of their story, which I'll talk a little about later. We're also adding Linda Eastman, who's very famous in library history and fulfills also our purposes. We want to be very broad-based in thinking and have way more than just male character actors. The arcade is not just significant for Cleveland. This is one of the organizations mentioned I belong to. I helped initiate the statewide preservation program, which is called Heritage Ohio, which has been around since 1991. One of the things they did earlier this year was they heart-bombed significant buildings around the state, is what they call it, to show the love for the building and call attention to them. This was the Heritage Ohio effort to heart-bomb the arcade and really show off it for Ohio's heritage. Go ahead. I'm going to do a Q&A when I'm done, though, but go ahead. Is it,
I
Nick?
just wondered if they put back for special holidays those festoons, those,
Oh, no, the building, not to the level what Harvey Ottman did, actually, in the 90s, but the building does get decorated nicely for the holidays, yes. Harvey used to have a fantastic tree in there. That is not as nice today. The other, as Nina said, we actually had 4 fantastic arcades. One of them was lost. It was in the old Taylor's department store building, and that was lost in the early 60s. But the Eisenman and Smith, Smith especially, was part of, in the Colonial Hotel, built in 1898. When it was built, part of its building, connecting it on Prospect Avenue to Euclid Avenue, which really became one of the premier streets of the country, not just Cleveland, for retail. You can see the Colonial Arcade and Colonial Hotel entryway. That's the Colonial Hotel. Actually, the original hotel lobby was on that second floor on the Prospect side. Now it's back on the first floor on Prospect. But it's again, that was a 2-level retail arcade. The main arcade was 5 levels. Today, that's been restored also as a hotel. It's a Marriott Residence Inn. I think it's actually, in my personal view, the nicest hotel to stay at downtown. The reason is the rooms are enormous. Every room is like a full apartment. 40 of the rooms have a fireplace. Some of them have 3 levels and a deck, and it's a great place to stay. And actually, it does the best economically of any hotel downtown Cleveland. The Marriott Residence Inn. So when people ask me, where do you tell people to stay? I do tell them to stay there if they can to experience it. So, but off that hotel, 2 arcades were built. The Colonial Arcade, which we see here, and the Euclid Arcade, which we'll get to. When we did the restoration project in '98, the hotel, much like the Hyatt Hotel, instantly made money. It's been very successful. The retail's been a harder challenge. One of those challenges, because the people that restored the building, candidly, were hotel people. They weren't retail people. So what happened was a couple years ago, I think at least almost 3 now, a person very close to here, actually, Dick Pace, who was an architect and is now a developer, he master leased the Euclid and Colonial Arcades and created a new marketing concept called the Fifth Street Arcades. Historically, there's no place called Fifth Street in Cleveland. It's a totally made-up name. It's actually on axis with East 6th Street, but it's Fifth Street Arcades. And it's adjacent because 4th Street nearby, which has been fully restored, has so much marketing identity. So he's created the Fifth Street Arcades, and they are totally full and occupied. It's really a grand success story. And the other thing it has, candidly, it has the TLC. It has the care it needs every day. He's in there every day. He manages it very closely. So I think it's a fantastic, and these are 2 of the Euclid Avenue storefronts where we had Rocket Fizz, which is a very interesting store, and Colossal Cupcakes, and if you can't see it further down, the other side is a gourmet coffee shop called Pour, P-O-U-R. And then, as I said, the other arcade in there is the Euclid Arcade, which was a single-story barrel-vaulted terracotta arcade built in the first decade of the 20th century, Italian marble, totally restored, tiling on the ground floor. Unfortunately, the original skylight was leaded glass, but during the Second World War, when you had natural light showing, a lot of those spaces were covered over or tar papered, and that history, the beautiful history of that was lost. So this is a redo, but not as grand as the original. But a very grand space, and also full and part of that Fifth Street Arcades. And really, this is the best historic photo back to the arcade. Cleveland's history is very dramatic with regard to the Republican National Conventions. In 1895, this is a photo of the arcade from the 1895 Republican National Association, I believe it was called then, their conference in Cleveland. And then the Republicans held 2 more conventions in Cleveland, not in the arcade, but in what at the time was the largest convention center in the world, Cleveland's Public Auditorium, in 1924 and 36. And I only tell you this, I used to claim when I gave my historic tour they would never come back again because the 36th convention was the convention where they nominated Alf Landon, who at the time then had the worst electoral loss in U.S. history. I figured they might never come back to Cleveland. Now, we know they've come back to Cleveland. They will be here this year. And actually, one of the anchor hotels for the conference is the Arcade Hyatt Regency. So the main hotel is the new Hilton, but the Arcade's a very significant hotel to the convention coming this year. And I think that is my last slide. So I'm going to just a couple other quick facts. Like I said, the Arcade was renovated for $65 million from 1999 to 2001. Reopened in May of that year. It won the National Trust Award for the best historic project in the country in its 2002 conference, which was held in Cleveland. And it also, it's 293 rooms, which are in both the upper stories of the actual Arcade and the two 10-story buildings. One other anecdotal thing about it was originally a 294-room hotel, but the person that manages the building liked living there so much, or his suite, they've now made that a private residence. And it's the private residence of including the current person that runs the hotel. And he's moved there with his family, and he has two small children, and they attend the Cleveland schools, and he came here from somewhere else, and they just did a little profile on him in a publication. So the Arcade is a really full-use building, and the other thing we're working on long-term is to really bring back the retail on the first two floors. We have two pretty significant early retail tenants who are now in there. Rising Star Coffee is now on the Superior side near the entrance, and there's a really phenomenally good pizza place that won the award for the best pizza in Cleveland, Pizza 216, which is taking over the old bank space on the Euclid Avenue side. And there's still two good restaurants in there too. On the Euclid Avenue side is a restaurant called the Chocolate Bar, which is part of a renovated restaurant space. It was called Vivo when the building was first renovated, and then also it was part of the hotel, and I think Nina occupied it once as an office space. But on the second level, the building's a restaurant tied to the Hyatt, which is called 1890 to celebrate the year the building was built. I'm not going to be able to stay the whole time, so I'd be happy to do a Q&A right now for whatever.
Can I just
Go ahead.
pipe up
Go
a
ahead.
little bit? So my office was in the 1890 restaurant when I was there in the 70s. And just to describe some of the interior life, we had Art Feldman in the building, who was the guru of art advice, visual art advice. We had Kieselgoff, who was an literary guru. We had doctors of feet. We had doctors in the building. We had a florist. We had a cigar shop. We had a tailor that was the tailor for everybody who cared about their tailoring. We had Marlou shoes. We had several different kinds of, Slovenian food. We had all kinds of food in the building, different food. But the things that I like to reflect on is that the original opera, Ohio Light Opera, performed on the steps there, Jim Stewart. There was a program called Be a Tourist in Your Town because there was a gasoline shortage. There was a choreography that we did to open up awareness of what the building spaces meant. We worked with the owners on that ceiling that was such a bear because of the amount of glass that had to be repaired. And there was an attempt all along there to try and get federal monies to help restore the building in some way or other, but nobody had the expertise until later to put the package together. And one of the mysteries was the cigar shop that was at the base of the stair there. So there's lots of memories and lots of parties there, but the one thing which was really interesting is that it was very difficult to hear. If a speaker came, I wondered about the Republican Party there because the speakers...
We usually put podiums on halfway up the steps on the Superior side
Right.
and speak out to people. You did remind me, one thing I want to mention, there is one significant change. In fact, it was critical to the restoration. And I got to give credit to the architect who figured it out. We were in danger of not getting the hotel flag because there wasn't enough meeting rooms. Because the original intention was to own the buildings further east on Euclid to 6th and put a ballroom and meeting rooms there. We ended up not owning those. So the architect for the restoration, Jonathan Sandvik, figured out a way. There used to be underneath the main level, there was only a 6-foot crawl space. So he calculated building a whole new set of places underneath the floor of the original first floor. So all the meeting rooms are actually underneath the original arcade. And you get there, and because it was only, you didn't need the superstructure to, the first floor superstructure only has to support the first floor. So structural engineering wise, that design worked. So it was fantastic thinking, and it ended up working and got Hyatt to agree to do the deal. We needed to solve for the Hyatt Corporation and the Pritzker family having the meeting room capacity. So if you go there today and you go into the hotel lobby, there's an extra set of stairs that go down to a level that was never there. Everything else is original. Those meeting rooms were actually, we tunneled down, we built more space underneath the building. And that was very dramatic and a very, very clever adaptation. The other thing that was able to be done, there's a very significant part of the Ohio Basic Building Code that we've championed now for close to, 30 years it's been in existence, and not heavily used by architects. We actually, with a colleague of Jim here, Alan Fodor, in 1991, Jonathan Sandvik and Alan Fodor hosted an architectural training program on using this code. And without this code, by code, we might not have been able to keep the arcade open to put hotel rooms because of current fire codes. So you're able to overcome the creativity and flexibility to renovate this building, make it a hotel, was also critical to the creativity of the architects, or the current architects. That's another story I have to tell you, because at one time we really were in danger of losing the deal because of not figuring out that meeting room concept. Go ahead, go ahead.
So is there a ballroom then on that bottom?
There are a couple large rooms. I wouldn't call none of them a ballroom. What is considered the ballroom in the hotel now is after 5 o'clock, they actually close the whole main floor, and that's the ballroom. In fact, there's a wedding there tonight I will be at. Yeah, it's a fantastic wedding space. And they're actually, the new owners from Canada are considering, back on the Euclid side, there's a food court. It's a question whether that's successful. There's only 2 current tenants who are both pretty good, by the way. But they're thinking of, it's kind of a banjo feel then. They're thinking of expanding what they consider that ground floor ballroom into the food court. That's one of the analyses they're doing right now.
And then the Hyatt went through some renovation, didn't it, too?
Well, every hotel in existence has a significant flag, and Hyatt's has to do what's called a TIP, improvement program, every 10 years to keep the flag. So what just happened with the Hyatt, they've redone some of the rooms, and they just did that. It's part of their every 10-year upgrade. Yeah, so they're in the process of putting another $3 to $5 million into the building. Yep, yes, ma'am.
What did you say the building in Rome was?
The Vittorio Emanuele. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned the buildings in Italy, but when I'm looking at the photographs, they remind me of the arcades in Paris.
Well, I'm just going by the architectural history that actually Eric Johansson and other Clevelanders who've written about the building. And it's even referenced in its Ohio Historic Preservation. There's a couple of historic plaques in the building, one big one along Superior, and it references grandly the Vittorio Emanuele. So that's all. That's the reason I bring it up. I know, that's my knowledge of it, because that's considered one of the grandest in Europe, and this was built to this. People who've been there said they look like they're twins. So I have never been there.
So,
Yes, ma'am.
I remember in the early 70s, the National Historic Preservation Society had their
Yes.
meeting.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, Cleveland's hosted that meeting, I believe, 3 times, and the last time was 2002. And they did reference those because the 2002 meeting, like I said, it won the National Trust Preservation Award.
so there's a piano on the bridge playing sometimes?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And
And a lot of singing groups play on the steps still.
that's
at
right.
lunchtime.
That's right. There was a whole program called Eine kleine Noon Music. And the AIA office was there. Don Hasakis' architectural office was there. Bill Coster's office was there. So it had a mix of,
Bob Gady was in there too.
Bob Getty was there. So people who cared about architecture were there. And so that made for a lively interior, congregation.
I would candidly say a hotel use is much quieter than a 5-level business give and take. So that's one of the things in the current renovation, that's lost, a little bit of that vitality. That's why we really got to make sure what happens on the first 2 floors brings back that kind of give and take. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. You're going to ask a question.
No, sorry.
Oh, well, both of you. You go first.
So who's putting the millions of dollars into this Hyatt?
Hyatt is, the original renovation was a joint venture between a company called LR out of Chicago and the Pritzker family. They were personal friends of the LR principal. LR eventually went out of business and there became a company called Related Midwest. Hyatt is just now a franchise and they're no longer part of it. The building's now owned by a Toronto company, which is actually based in Tel Aviv, but their North American base is in Toronto.
They're the ones that put in the 5.
Yes. Because they have to keep the Hyatt flag.
Right.
Yes. Ma'am, in the back?
No, I was just.
Oh, okay. Other questions? The group that bought it from Toronto, and I'm blanking on their name right now, they just also recently bought the Renaissance Hotel on the square.
Next question.
Yeah, so they I think they're vested in Cleveland, hopefully, and they will make good choices. They are legally bound to make good choices on our easement. I actually have an odd role because I'm trying to facilitate them doing things, and I'm also their regulator because I'm the enforcer of the historic easement. So it's interesting. But candidly, when you work in historic preservation and trying to restore historic buildings, you always have to balance that role. You're trying to make development happen, and the developer's always trying to figure out a way to do it maybe for a little less. And you're the historic preservation guy, so you're always trying to push them to do a little bit more. So it's an interesting internal tussle, too.
Any other questions?
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do you find it difficult to find qualified craftsmen to do these preservation?
You do, but I have to say, I should mention, the original contractor that restored the arcade was Bruce Brothers Construction here. They're great contractors on a lot of historic preservation projects. I would say one of Cleveland's strengths, and we actually, I didn't say this enough, Ohio is, since the Economic Tax Recovery Act of '81, creating these incentives for historic preservation, Ohio is either, depending on how you rank it, by number of projects or by amount of renovation. There's 3 ways you can rank it. In any of the 3 ways, we're still in the top 5 in the country. On one of them, we're number 1, and one of them we're number 3, and one of them we're number 5. And I will always tell people the reason Ohio ranks so high is because of Cleveland. And Cleveland's the most dramatic place. So the historic preservation tax credit, Cleveland's its greatest success story. And so we have a great expertise here in architecture, in terms of adaptive reuse, in terms of accounting and finance, and I would say even in terms of construction. And so people come and meet with me all the time from other cities, like, how did you do this? Actually, Clevelanders have done other significant buildings. The Guarantee building in Buffalo was restored by a Cleveland developer. All the Heinz food warehouses in Pittsburgh were restored by a Cleveland developer. The Book Cadillac in Detroit, which was called the Midwest's Waldorf Astoria, was restored by a Cleveland developer. Actually all 3 of those were by one Cleveland developer. It's John Furchel, but there is a great expertise. And John Furchel knows that. His accountant is Ron DeGrandis, who has packaged probably more tax credits than any other accountant in the U.S. His architect's Jonathan Sandvik, who's done 300 historic buildings around the country in 15 states. And Maroos Brothers, and there's other ones too, but I think they've done the most in Cleveland as a construction company, and they're just started a new project where they're the GC on, which is also a grand historic building. The Standard building on Ontario and St. Clair is about to be restored into 275 housing units. So that's the other Cleveland story. Because when we studied the arcade, I mentioned those 3 studies in the 90s. 2 of those studies were to do it as housing, not a hotel. And the reason the housing didn't work is because every housing tenant expects a parking place. We could not figure out the parking for the arcade. A hotel guest does not care. You can valet their car far away. But a housing person, so actually One of the reasons it became a hotel was the parking dilemma. But I was going to say, to speak to historic preservation, in downtown Cleveland, in 1986, myself and 5 other people founded what was called the Downtown Housing Task Force. At the time, we had 6 market rate places to live in downtown. I always give this quiz, because I should give it to you too. So how many market rate places do you think there are to live in downtown Cleveland today?
Over 30.
You're not even close. 86. And of those, 69 of them are adaptive reuse historic renovations. And it's well over $1 billion the same, yeah. So people, I find it funny. I still know people don't think anybody lives downtown, which is hilarious. I tell them there's 2,000 dogs downtown, much less. Because the dogs come before the kids. We do have a lot of dogs. I'm exaggerating. I know a few years ago, there were 900 dog licenses downtown, and we know not everybody gets a license. And this is 4 years ago. So we know I'm probably not far off by saying there are 2,000 dogs downtown. Which brings us a whole bunch of other issues. Yes, ma'am.
What was the term you used, market what, when you said there were 86 of them?
Market rate, as opposed to public housing or subsidized elderly, or because in 1986 we had some subsidized high-rise buildings, and there's some of them are good. And we actually restored one of the historic buildings and is still staying senior elderly. The old Pick Carter Hotel is now, it was actually built as the Winton Hotel. We put a conservation easement on that, which raised $9 million 7 years ago to get that redone and upgraded, and it's now the Winton Manor. It's senior housing. So for the most part, though, most of these projects have gone to become market rate loft apartments. And the majority, there's two main groups that live in those apartments. There's young professionals, and that we categorize that as about 25 to 40. But then there's empty nesters, and they're a huge cluster too, and I categorize that 40 to 60, either kids are grown up, got divorced, whatever. And then we have a whole bunch of other things it's hard to categorize, but it's a pretty diverse group of people.
Can you break it down demographically? What?
Here's an interesting thing. When we first started doing it, it was almost 80% male, 20% female. Today it's more females than male. So obviously it tells you, what does that tell you a lot? It tells you a lot about the safety. So believe me, the other thing that I always marvel at people, we have 3 grocery stores downtown. Most people don't even know we have one. Heinen's gets the most play, but we had 2 prior to that already. We have one in the warehouse strip that's Constantino's Market that went into the Bingham. The Bingham hardware was the largest hardware store in the world at one time. It's now a adaptive reuse in a grocery store. And we have a Dave's on the east edge of downtown, and Dave's is a regional regular supermarket. And obviously, we have a lot of people who just go over the bridge and go to the west side market.
So is an underground trail between buildings.
That's one of the myths. People say there's all these tunnels. They're not there. There's some utility tunnels. There was a connector out of Public Hall into the mall. Some of that's been closed up. But when the Beatles played Public Hall, it helped get them away from the crowds. I don't know their exact route. I do know it's truthful. I think it got them to a building that's unfortunately was knocked down. There was a tunnel into the old engineers building, which is where the Marriott Hotel is today. But that tunnel's been sealed. But there was Channel 8, Channel 3, somebody came at me last year. We want to meet you and have us show all the underground tunnels all on 4th Street. I says, they really aren't here. Well, we heard they're there. So there's a lot of mythology out there. Yes, ma'am.
The density. Do you see the density growing downtown?
Oh, definitely. No, we're going to be close to 20,000 people downtown shortly. That's why Heinen's came. Believe me, these people do not make they make decisions based on real numbers. In fact, I was trying to recruit a grocery store in the warehouse strip in '88, and they told me, well, until you have 500 residents, you're not even going to get a convenience store. And guess what? When we hit 500 residents, we got a convenience store. And they said, when you hit 3,000 residents, you'll get a junior grocery store. Guess what? We had 3,000 residents. That's when Constantine. It's pure math. So we know we're going to get to 20,000 residents with what's already built and underway. And we have major retailers telling us, you get to 20,000 residents, well, we're there. We've had some things we haven't let happen. We had Walgreens want to do a huge drugstore. We need a good drugstore, but they wanted me to knock a building down so they could have their drive-through. Sorry. Ain't going to happen.
So you're saying the total residents right now, 20,000.
No, right now we're about close to 15,
That you see it.
but with what's underway, and we also have over 2,000 people on waiting lists.
Waiting for a place to live.
Yeah,
Right.
every building's full. We have 2 non-performers. The only reason there's vacancies is because we have 2 buildings run by people who don't care how they run their building. Consumers are not, they're smart.
So,
Unfortunately, one of the buildings that's kind of not so good is the Chesterfield, but I think, to speak to historic credits, next year, 2017, that building becomes 50 years old. It becomes eligible for all this historic financing. I think a developer will buy it, take advantage of the historic financing, and fully renovate the building. I think it's a great building.
so the young people, do they move around a lot?
They used to more than they do now. The dilemma we have, because we use so much historic tax credit financing, is that forces the building for at least 5 to 7 years to be rental. The other dilemma is, since the banking crisis of 2008, nobody finances condominiums. So unless you pre-sell 60 to 70%, which no developer wants to take the time to do, it's much easier to build apartments.
What is the mix between condos?
We have 900 condos downtown out of all those residents, which isn't that many. The demand is probably at least for double that.
Is double that?
I said the demand, in my view, probably from just anecdotally, and I can't prove it, I think is at least double that. We have people living in downtown condos. The biggest, the highest priced ones are in the warehouse district. We have a building called the Pinnacle, which is kind of modern. Some architecture people don't like, but there's 4 units in there that have sold for over $1 million. There's one of those guys one of those guys I've talked to. He has a place in Europe somewhere on the ocean. He has a place in Los Angeles on the ocean. He owns 4 places. This is one of his 4, what I'm trying to make. So he does, cost is no object. He's a Clevelander, and he doesn't want me to tell you who he is.
Can we move to Shaker Square now?
Go, yes.
Is everybody-
Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much.
Like I said, please come on a take hike this summer if you haven't done them, or go on all 5. They're all different. They're all
Thank you, Tom, thanks so much. All right, Shaker Square presentation has 2 parts. Carol, would you come up here, though? And the one thing I want to pass around here.
Yeah, but I'd like to see the movie. I can't see it from there. Start-
Oh, you can't see?
I won't be able to from there.
Can she see from here?
Well, see,
No.
No.
Okay,
So
all right.
we'll do the movie first.
Okay, we're going to do 2 things here. We're going to pass around what was brought to me from the Shaker Historical Society, which is a puzzle of the old arcade. It's something that we want to share, but it's a treasure of not of the society so much as of Ware, who is the director. She brought it to me, but it's a puzzle, 500-piece puzzle of the old arcade. All right. The second thing is that we're going to show a film on the history of Shaker Square right now. And then we will discuss the history, and we will look at the list that you have on your seat, because we're going to talk about what has happened at Shaker Square. And Carol Lowenthal, who is living here right now in this building, has had a major role because she started what is the connection, which is it's on the back, back table. It's the newsletter. So we're going to have a discussion of those things after the film and after my history. Okay? So it's 2 parts. This was done with WOIO, this film, on an anniversary of SHAD. Oh, Foss. Yeah.
Shaker Square, with a memorable past, vital present, and dynamic future, is a kaleidoscope of many colors. Shaker Square has always meant meeting and greeting, a hub to come to and go from, a range of shopping, of lifestyles, and residential possibilities, a place where people come to do things. Shaker Square is a historic shopping center, originally created to serve the carriage trade. Its architectural details are clues to its status as a historic district. In the sense the square is an outdoor mall with style and quality its trademarks. The square has always had style. The classic look of the 30s is the look of today and of tomorrow. Shaker Square's classic designs are still winning awards. Today it is a specialty center, a cosmopolitan place for society on the go. People come to the square to eat, to visit, to shop. They buy clothing, photo supplies, flowers, even our Congresswoman shops here for gifts. They buy records and they buy tapes. John Wade's, the predecessor of today's music of note, was a favorite in the 40s and 50s. The sound of music has always been heard on the square. And there's always been a bookstore, a delight for all avid readers and browsers. We also have establishments never dreamed of in the 30s, a TV station, WOIO 19. And Arabica. For many, this is the square today. People start their day here, depart for places citywide, and often wind up the day at Arabica as well. It is the internal conference room, the discussion table, the coffee break, the gathering place. The square extends a block away to Larchmere, the street of shops, known for its antiques and collectibles and crafts. It is also home to a dressmaker, a shoemaker, and other neighborhood service shops. Larchmere is a walking and strolling street, sprinkled with simple, tasty, inexpensive shops to eat. With so many shops and services available at Shaker Square, a week's worth of errands can be accomplished in record time. But Shaker Square is much more than a shopping center. It represents Cleveland's finest in urban cosmopolitan living for a wide variety of people of different lifestyles and ages. The residential dream started at Moreland Courts, which has housed an array of Cleveland's leaders from the beginning. It included corporate executives and leaders of the city's health and cultural institutions. It still does today. It also houses the office of the Green Umbrella, the security system for the area serving both the merchants and the residents. The square's variety of housing accommodates young professionals, newlyweds, families of all sizes, former house owners, now high-rise dwellers, singles and couples, just about everyone. Streets reflect the elegance of Tudor, Georgian, and contemporary styles. Residents can send their children to Shaker Heights schools, vote for the Shaker Heights Library Board, and also vote for the mayor of Cleveland. Due to its unique zoning, the area is serviced by these two cities and represents the best of both. Shaker Square is an urban neighborhood with a cultural mix. The square today began with the dream of the Van Swearingen brothers in the early 1920s. Originally called Moreland Circle, the rapid transit connecting the Heights with downtown Cleveland was a special part of the dream. The rapid gets you downtown in 12 minutes, to the airport in 50. University Circle, the city's world-class cultural, medical, and education center, is only a 10-minute drive away. Shaker Square is a convenient place to live. It also is a gateway to suburban Cleveland, dotted with lavish green areas for walking and running and picnicking. The Shaker Lakes, an up-to-date fitness trail, and the Shaker Lakes Regional Nature Center are but a brisk walk away. Shaker Square is a real neighborhood. It includes St. Luke's hospitals and churches, all of which provide meeting places for committed volunteers. Public events have been sponsored at the square since 1929. The most remembered and revered are the Very Square Fair and the Christmas tree lighting. In the 40s, the Christmas tree lighting display was so spectacular that it warranted a 2-page spread in Life magazine. And things have never been dull. One time Santa came by air. Another time he had to be rescued by the fire department. He froze and panicked as he was poised for descent atop the roof of the Colony Theater. The Colony Theater, of smashing Art Deco design, opened in December of 1937, starring Betty Davis and Leslie Howard in It's Love I'm After. Today it features Hollywood's latest releases. This vital entertainment, shopping, and living area is supported by a volunteer association of over 2,100 members. Friends of Shaker Square. FOSS, started in the mid-70s, Its members work to preserve and improve the area. FOSS provides opportunities for people to become involved, and it communicates with over 15,000 families through its own publication, The Connection. Shaker Square is its people. It is a unique place among the best in the country for a diverse urban life. It is a neighborhood in the truest sense. Shaker Square, with a memorable past, vital present, and dynamic future. It is a kaleidoscope of many colors.
Because I really love Shaker Square. I come here every Saturday, and I
was raised around the square.
I live here because I love the neighborhood. I love the diversity of people, the convenience that's here.
Well, I think that Shaker Square has so much to offer me. It started out when we were...
Well, you know, the square is like a kaleidoscope. What I like keeps changing.
What year was this from, Nina? What year was this produced?
The,
What year was the film?
on, the built in, the square built? Oh, the 25th anniversary of Shad.
Which
So,
would have been around, 76 is when Shad started.
right, so,
Around,
yeah.
2000. If it was the
It's a good
25th
question, but I, it was an octagon that was once a traffic circle. That's the way it's described. And then they moved the rapid exchange a little bit east, where it turns into the Green Road and the Van Aken Rapids. And at the intersection of North and South Moreland, the area was designated to be a retail district that would feed everybody in the city. It makes it a very, very important place, because it not only was envisioned as the gateway to a planned residential community, but because there was 8 miles of railroad development by the Van Swearingens, we could get downtown here in 10 minutes. And that was very key to it, and makes it really unique. Do you want to put on some more slides there? That was from the beginning. And you can see some of the retail that was envisioned and also in place on the slide. Everybody can see it? There was a travel, Shaker Square travel. There were 2 automobile dealers on the square, Cadillac and Oldsmobile.
Where were they located?
Over on, near the theater. There were 1943 image shows a lion in the advertising the travel. And of course there was the record store. You saw that. There were John Wade record shop. How many people remember John Wade's? Yeah, people went there and met their boyfriends there. Music lovers from all over. I mean, even Mrs. The president of the wife of the president of the Philippines went there, it says. Okay, so there were lots of things, and the stores are memorable. Tassie's. There was no one place where this record is now available. So I have had to piece together the history of the merchants. Nobody has it. Anybody who wants to volunteer at the Shaker Historical Society, they really, really would love to do this. And that's who we borrowed these images from. And so if you take a minute to read who was at the square, those are the you may want to go back for a minute to see these, because they were given to me for today, and they tell us what were the merchants. Can you see clearly? Good. It even talks about the second floor tenants. See, each quadrant had the 2 levels and then a central focus that has the higher floor. Okay. Have you had enough chance to see what those are? Okay. So I want to share with you the list of people, because there was a development. And Carol, how did the Friends of Shaker Square get started?
Well, I moved here with my family in 1976, and one of my neighbors told me that a new group was forming, and it was the Friends of Shaker Square. At that time, the square had really fallen off its original glory, and people were very concerned about what the future of the area was going to be. There had been a traditional lighting ceremony every Thanksgiving weekend for the whole community. Everybody came, Santa Claus was there, you saw some of that in the movie. And the owner of the square at that time decided he didn't want to continue this glorious display. And there were people in the community who were not happy about that, and they wanted to do something about it. And they formed this neighborhood association around the square and called it Friends of Shaker Square. Well, first of all, there were people from Shaker Heights as well as Cleveland and Cleveland Heights, anybody who really cared about the square area. So the group formed, and I happened to move a few months after they had started, and I came from Minneapolis, and there we had neighborhood newspapers. Every neighborhood had its own newspaper. So I came and said, is there a newspaper here I can get involved in? And the Friends of Shaker Square said, no, but what a great idea. Why don't you start one? And that's how we started the newspaper, which I hope you've all seen. If not, there are a few copies in the back. And it was intended to bring the community together. We incorporated the Buckeye neighborhood, the Larchmere neighborhood, Shaker Heights, and everything in between to facilitate communication among the neighbors and to make this more of a cohesive community. We did it as all volunteers. We spent a number of years cutting and pasting on my dining room table. Came out 5 times a year, and it was truly a volunteer community effort. And now it's become much more professional, but it still serves a great purpose, I think, in this area. Anyway, so the Friends of Shaker Square formed, and they quickly realized that there were physical improvements that were desperately needed on the square. And so a number of the people in the group said, let's see if we can get some community development block grant money, which had just started to come into being, to replace the broken sidewalks and street lighting and so forth. And so they did. They applied for the grant, and they did get money for it. And that was really the first major project of the group, was to renovate the physical appearance of the square itself. Then over the years, Friends of Shaker Square realized that to really help the neighborhood, they were going to have to branch out beyond the commercial area of the square and get into the neighborhoods. Because if the neighborhoods weren't strong, the square was never going to make it either. So little by little, we got more and more involved in the neighborhoods. We would buy a house that had been abandoned or foreclosed on. We would buy it and renovate it and resell it, and then take that money and buy another one. Eventually, we got into doing the same with small apartment buildings in the area, and we did that with, I don't know, half a dozen apartment buildings around. So it grew and developed. At some point, people in the organization realized that people thought it was like a Friends of the commercial area, and they wanted to be taken seriously as a development corporation, so they changed the name from Friends of Shaker Square to Shaker Square Area Development. But it was the same organization, the same people. When the group started out, they had a board of 45 people, not because anybody thought that was a workable board, but because they wanted to get everybody involved who was possibly interested, and they made everybody serve on committees, and everybody was involved in the different activities. They had lots of talent to draw on. There were architects in the neighborhood, there were writers. One of the things that the group did early on was Joan Houghton was very interested in historical designation, and she got the area on the National Register of Historic Places, as Nina mentioned. So the group has been involved in a lot of activities, always for the purpose of keeping the neighborhood strong. And it's still going today. It has lost some of the funding because it's not as, I'm not sure what to say. It's not considered a priority by some of the funding organizations. So it's fallen on harder times. At one time, we had memberships numbering in the over 1,000 families were members. And now it's fallen down to a few hundred. But it's still very active, still involved with keeping this area strong and the Larchmere area strong, and it's a busy group.
Your list is a historic list, mostly. We did it with the Greg Storsky, who's at the Friends of Shaker Square, who's at SHAD right now, Shaker
He's the
Square
current
Area
executive
Development. And we also want you to know that the people there today have made it possible to even sit here, because there was a time when it was very fragile, a few years
That's
ago.
for sure, yes.
And so those people are not historic, they're current. And their names are on the roster of the connection. And so I want to be sure.
The board members.
Yeah,
are
the
listed
board
in
members of the connection deserve a lot of credit for fighting through this period. George Palda and others, Alfred. What's her first name?
George Palda?
No, Palda, but, the dancing sheep.
Oh, Lynn
Yeah,
Alfred, yes.
And she's been very active in wanting to preserve this space here at Shaker Square. It's still a very, very important core of Cleveland. And those of us that live here know that we struggle with not only what's going on downtown and its vitality, but University Circle as well, that has developed much in the way of residential that is, until this time, mostly apartments, not condominiums.
Yeah.
But that's changing. So we struggle with that, and we've all been involved. We've all been on the boards, or we've all been, involved in our condominiums. So the preservation is very, very important. So I wanted just to say that, people are really, really dedicated to their former roles. We had the very square affair with, and Jim, what did Jane Campbell say about the very square affair?
No, that wasn't what she said. But, it was a very popular
Benefit.
current celebration, actually. I think one of the most delightful comments, because, that place was crowded and people were parading around the thing. And I was walking with Nina one night and talking to other people. I heard from a couple behind us, gee, this is just like Provincetown for straights.
Okay.
One of the things I think I'd like to add, and that is the importance of the Shaker Square Area Development Corporation. There was an attempt about 5 years ago to make them go out of business. The neighborhood progress was not going to fund them anymore. They were not priority. It was felt that they needed to bring on Buckeye, or give some strength to Buckeye, which was really faltering and had not good leadership. And Shad did not accept it. He said, we're not going to be swallowed by neighborhood progress, and therefore they just insisted on keeping going. That effort, and it was a hard, tough one, finally got to the point where it took Larchmere as its focus, because Larchmere was the place that really needed the work and the concentration. And I think the fact that they have been so successful, it has been recognized by funding sources. That's why the Larchmere district has become renovated, has been given some recognition, and it's the persistence and vision of this group that's so important.
Yeah. Yes, NPI did decide all over Cleveland that we had too many development corporations, was really what they decided, and that a lot of them should merge. And they wanted Shad to merge with the Buckeye Area Development Corporation. And it might have happened. Unfortunately, it was not presented well, and the meeting where people were supposed to vote on it, the membership was told that there was no time for discussion, couldn't have any amendments, couldn't have any changes in the proposal. It was just, we only have time to vote up or down. And the membership said, well, we have a lot of questions, we have a lot of things we'd like to work out first. And so the membership turned down the merger, which a lot of people feel was unfortunate, but that's what happened. The membership is totally in control of SHAD, Shaker Square Area Development. And so that is what happened. We've been struggling ever since to try to continue our work, but maybe sometime in the future those groups will merge. That would be probably good for the whole area, but it hasn't happened yet.
All those things take so much time. And it is that this group of people in front of you spent time making sure that Shaker Square would survive and would be programmed. There, of course, is the North Union Market, Farmers Market, that draws from everywhere around. I talked to Shara Cowan, who did, remember the tent art shows here? She did those for a number of years. So, of course, the cinemas have their own life and play a role in the larger community because of the management. And so it is that's really the story of Shaker Square. It's not different. Talk about the soul of Cleveland. It's not different than the preservation of Shaker Lakes, in a sense, because the community made it happen. And here we are, precisely the same community with the next generation of people, and saying, no, we're not giving up, and we're not giving in to development that doesn't serve a community purpose as well as Shaker Square has. It may have more restaurants. It may have more of one sort or another. It is a destination for eating. There's no question about it. Irwin's was just given national credit for what they've been doing, and that is a feather in everybody's cap. And, you know, so people of all economic do eat here and find a way of being here. Does it mean everything's perfect? We still have a lot of work to do. But that's the story of Shaker Square. Does anyone have questions now?
Moving down a little ways then to like when St. Luke's Hospital closed and the decision to put that into apartments and all of that, was your group involved in any of that, or is that beyond?
Yes, yes and no. Initially, the SHAD group was very involved, but at the same time, there was some redistricting done between SHAD, the Shaker Square area, and Buckeye area development. And in the redrawing of the lines, that particular building was put into the Buckeye area. And so they sort of took over then from that point.
And so what you were talking about before that really dropped your group out of, you know, the fact
that was, yes, that was involved with, that was part of it, yeah.
Because that's been new residential now for the older people and keeping that
Yes,
building.
and one of the charter schools has moved in there. It's really a very vital
Intergenerational is in
place.
there now.
I'm sorry?
Is intergenerational in there
Yes.
now? That's
Mhm.
what I thought.
Yeah.
When we were doing the film, and I think if you count 25 years out from 76, you will find the year of the film, because we did it as an anniversary item. And the meeting was held over at where Plantscapes was and the restaurant there. And so some of the anecdotes, though, were precious. They were wonderful. There was the woman that went into labor at the movie place. There were the teenagers that dated around the record store and declared that their favorite spot. There was, excuse me, but somebody said, my favorite always was HMO Schwartz. Now, HMO Schwartz, of course, is FAO Schwartz, but she was into HMOs at that time. So we had fun stories that came out of those interviews. And then there were people that met us at Arabica, which is just on the brink of changing. I mean, after all, fire's there now. But they said that after they took their morning walks, and wherever they came from, they ended up there, which was fun.
When
So,
the square was developed, it really was a very high-end shopping area. Women used to come with their maids to help them dress as they shopped for clothes. The chauffeur would drop them off. It was a place to be. And there was a Peck and Peck, there was
Kelly Kit,
the Schwartz, Kelly, yes.
the Milgrams, I mean, Franklin Simons, I mean, you just walked from one beautiful store to another.
Yes.
And you're right, I mean, you dressed up, it wasn't something.
That's what I'm told. I wasn't here then. But it, unfortunately, very slowly, as we all did, we all became more casual.
Hallie's was the anchor down there, you know.
Hallie's,
that-
yes,
that's
had a big,
upscale,
yes,
so.
right,
No,
so,
it was very real.
right.
And you know, the restaurant too, the movie still showed the Stouffer building as Vernon's, and that one building that's now, I think, CVS, you know, with so many different, really wonderful.
right.
You're right.
The issue of the Van Aken Strip has always been there, always. I
That
call
is a
it,
different owner, which people may
That's
not
right.
know. That is not the same owner as the square. And every time the square changes hands, the new owner tries to buy that block. We call it the fifth quadrant. And it's all empty now, as you probably noticed. There are, I think, 2 stores in there, Goodwill and the Chinese takeout. But the owner of that strip will not sell it. He won't renovate it. He doesn't seem to want to rent it out anymore. So we don't know what is going on with it, but it's really an eyesore in the neighborhood. And it's not fair to the community to have that sitting there looking so dilapidated and deteriorated. But that is really not connected to the square.
right. When I was on the board of SHAD, I used to call them all the time. So,
It's still the same
Men-
owner
I
and still
know.
the same answer.
right, right, that's a long time. But there was Clark's Restaurant, and there was the bowling alley, and there was the fire that really,
The Red Bull
Yeah.
burned down, yeah.
so,
Any other comments or things that people like to share, remember about the square? Yeah.
Remember taking our children down on the rapid and stopping at Shaker and eating at Stouffer's, but then later in the evening joining my husband and friends at the tap room, which was behind the Stouffer's.
Yes. Actually, from this building, there's a secret entrance to what used to be the tack room. There's still a sign on the wall saying tack room with an arrow. But of course, that's not there anymore, and the places have changed hands so many times that you're not able to do that now. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
but the thing that you started, which was the connection, is a powerful tool for still making the community aware of what's going on. Oops, and, I'm sorry. And there's some available, we get them in the mail. or
If you're a member of SHAD, you get it in the mail. Otherwise, they have them in stacks at different, the libraries and the stores and a lot of places around in the community.
Right.
So you can always pick one up, and it's no cost. Yeah.
One thing I remember is that there used to be a parking lot on top of what was Franklin Simon. And that
Yes.
saved a lot of the parking problem around here.
Well, it is still there.
Oh, is it?
It was used by the merchants in that fifth quadrant, the Van Aken Strip, for their employees, and it was gated off so that the public didn't use it. But now there's nobody, no stores there, so it is not used anymore. But it is still there.
How is the population and occupancy rate of both the apartment and the housing? Is it a very stable area where you park it with the housing foreclosures as far as surrounding neighborhoods?
Yeah, some of the smaller houses in the surrounding neighborhoods have, well, some of them have been deserted and either foreclosed or abandoned in one way or another. And some of them have been torn down. But there is an active community association in the Fairwood neighborhood. Now it's called Larchmere. They used to be called Fairwood because it was between Fairhill and Woodland. And also in the Ludlow community, both parts of Cleveland. And they're very active in trying to prevent blight from taking over. But sure, just like most places.
Okay,
in the country.
I can share with you the figures of population since the
Okay.
40s. The highest number of people that lived here was in 1950, 20,000 people. Now there are 12,000 people in this area, historic population.
Originally, I'm told that the Larchmere area was an Italian neighborhood for the most part, and the Buckeye neighborhood was Hungarian.
Hungarian. And the Hungarian population in Cleveland is huge.
Yes.
One of the biggest outside of Hungary. Yeah.
Hence Balaton Restaurant, which used to be on Buckeye.
Balaton,
And is now
right.
on the square.
And the things that even are still there now.
Yep,
And Lucy's was there.
yes, right.
Lucy's and, of course, Balaton. All right. Any other questions? So next week, we're going to make the bookend. We started with the bookstores. We're going to talk about paper making and book preservation, a la L.A. Strong, who is really right there in Loganberry. That's where Strong Bindery has been. But I think she's worked for every possible library or bookstore or individual that cared about preserving their books. And she will be here. You heard her the first time in a different role. And then Tom Balbo, who had an art store, art gallery, actually, on Larchmere at one time for his own artwork, is now the head of Morgan Conservancy that is doing powerful work in paper preservation and creation from paper. Cleveland has a big history of paper making here, and in print making, and in poster making, all of that. So Tom will be here, and that will be our last session. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Carol.
Sure.
Fun? Did you have fun?
Yes. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I'm glad you did it because, you know, you had the global view.